Hello, everyone. So, you can go ahead and start whenever. All right. So, I'm Justin Buchanan, and along with my business partner, Jake McDowell, I'm one of the co-founders of Red Harbor Rum here in Charleston. And as she mentioned, our whole business idea was kind of recreating rum as it would have existed back in the colonial period. So tonight I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the history of rum, its production, its role in the American economy, and its kind of unsuspected role in the American Revolution. So about 3 years ago, Jake and I had the idea that we wanted to start up a craft distillery. At the time, as you can see from the chart above, there was a massive boom going on. Actually, the year that we applied, there were more applicants than operating distilleries in the United States. And of course, we knew we wanted to be located in Charleston. Jake had always lived here, and I'd enjoyed all the time that my family and I'd spent here. So we immediately thought, what should we do when we come here? And the one thing that Charleston is really known for is its history. So we decided whatever product we wanted to make, we wanted to reflect the really unique kind of heritage of this town. And with the recent craze and all of everyone's so mad about bourbon, we assumed that's what we would find. We started digging around, and we were really surprised to find that before 1800, you pretty much couldn't find anything but rum references. In fact, St. Philip's Church was built on a 2-cent rum tax throughout the 1760s and 70s. And we found out that about the average American male was drinking about a half pint of rum a day at this time, which really reframed some of our founding fathers, considering they were probably shit-faced drunk all the time. But to kind of get back to where we started, it all starts with sugarcane, which is this incredibly sweet grass that originated in Southeast Asia and was brought over into the Caribbean islands by Columbus on his second voyage. Grew like wildfire, and all of a sudden these sugarcane plantations were just cropping up all over the Caribbean. It was an extremely arduous process to harvest. It would grow very easily, but there's a lot of things about working with sugarcane that are very difficult to work around. For one thing, it has to be cut by hand at this early stage, and if you don't get it to the mill quick enough, it will actually start to ferment itself. So very quickly, they had to move it from the fields to large rollers. This is a little bit more industrial, but still kind of rustic. But they would actually be hand-rolled, and what would happen is they would move the sugarcane through it multiple times, and a sort of thick syrup would come off, and that would be kind of separated out from the kind of remainder of the stalk. And what would happen is they'd put this in a vessel, and there would be a crystallization process of the sugar itself. But what you'd be left with is molasses, this really goopy substance that would just kind of drip away from the crystallized and valuable sugar. And a problem with this is that there was a ton of molasses, and they didn't really know what to do with it. They were dumping tons of it into the ocean, and what they would do is, with the ships that were heading to the New World along with sugar, they would take some of them and they would pair them, and they would just fill barrels with molasses and start rolling them in to kind of use as like a cheap sweetener. And it's kind of interesting, especially in the history of South Carolina. A lot of people think of rice as one of the main things that kind of contributed to the growth of the early colonies, but it was actually the trade in this excess molasses that made South Carolina profitable and really secured a solid relationship with Barbados as well. Few people know, but about 7 of our first 23 governors were actually Barbadian here in South Carolina. So eventually the islanders made a discovery. They could take this molasses and they could water it down and it would ferment. Now, it's terrible. Do not drink this stuff. But the good news is it becomes like a really high gravity beer, which, though disgusting, can be distilled to make what was called at the time Kill Devil, and now has become rum. So effectively what would happen is they'd distill this high gravity beer, and they would put it into a distillation system that essentially raises the temperature to the evaporating point of alcohol, but not the evaporating point of water. So it would separate out the alcohol. You get a really concentrated form that would really mess up the islanders. And so then the issue was they still had more than they could possibly drink, so they had to ship it. And one interesting thing we found is that back then, barrels were, of course, just a kind of common way of moving goods and service and items. So they would actually burn the insides of these barrels more so to sanitize them from the fish or turpentine or God knows what was in the barrels beforehand, less so to improve the flavor. So what makes a very different product, too, kind of a little bit more of like a bourbon, oaky flavor to it. But what this did for the islands is it actually made their waste product profitable enough for them to pay for their entire expenses, which made the island some of the wealthiest places per capita in the entire world at this time. So shortly thereafter, we're seeing all of the success in turning molasses into rum, and all of a sudden, the American colonies get this great idea that they should do it too. So this is actually George Washington's distillery. Now they make whiskey, but at the time, he was actually producing rum. So it's kind of interesting. A lot of people don't realize, but In the colonial period, rum distillation just absolutely exploded because all of this excess molasses, which they still couldn't even make enough, or they were making so much they couldn't even turn into rum, it became the second largest industry in the colonial United States. So just behind shipbuilding, actually. And what was interesting about this is that with that massive industry, of course, the British got interested in making some money off of it. So very quickly, they started to impose taxes, starting with the Molasses Act and then later the Sugar Act, which had two consequences. One, they actually really affected the profitability of this large industry, which notably as well included George Washington's interest, who later played an important role in the Revolution. But two, it also left a lot of really angrily sober colonists to revolt. So, and kind of a more like case in point about the degree to which colonists love their rum, in Paul Revere's famous ride, he actually stopped one time to throw back a dram of rum, which really shows that no matter what the circumstances, the colonists were definitely willing to put their rum first. So kind of learning about the role that rum played in the early colonies, and more so the role that it even played in sort of catapulting the American Revolution, Jake and I really knew that we had to come and try and recreate this American colonial spirit. So this is our 60-gallon still. It took us about 2 years to get everything set up, and we sourced all of our ingredients from the Caribbean, sort of tried to do everything the authentic way, and ended up, well, that's not the end of it, but, okay. But yeah, more or less, at the end of the day, we've ended up with a really unique product, has a very different taste profile from the rums you typically expect, has a lot more of like that kind of oaky char to it, but still a really great sweetness. And I hope you guys get to try it. We're all around town right now, and we're also in the Culinary Village if you'd like to swing by and have a chat.